Hello, and welcome to the 2024 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Kansas City, Missouri. I am Chris Biak, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. Here's a visual description of myself. I'm a blonde, middle-aged woman in a blue and gold coat. The Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I am a member of AWP's Board of Directors, but first and foremost, I am a member of AWP. Membership with AWP provides me with writing resources year-round, but just as importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. My membership dues help writers find meaningful careers and publication opportunities and make services like Writer-to-Writer Mentorship Program and the AWP HBCU Fellowship Program possible. If you haven't already, I invite you to become a member today. We are delighted to bring you this event today. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and the literary partner hosting this event, Kundiman. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Now, before we start, I do need to do some brief housekeeping. Please silence your cell phones. Remember, there is no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. Please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table before approaching them to have your book signed. Lastly, we ask that you please be aware of your fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help AWP be more accessible. Specifically, if you see a barrier to accessibility, let us know by calling or texting our accessibility hotline at 240-269-6635. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question someone's use of an accommodation. Thank you, and now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Gina Chung, who will introduce this fantastic event.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We're very excited to welcome you all to today's featured reading and conversation with Marcy Calabretta Kensi-Obeyo, Franny Choi, Megha Majumdar, and Srikanth Reddy. We are so thrilled that you can all be here with us today, whether in person in Kansas City or virtually. My name is Gina Chung, and I am the programs manager at Kundiman. Here is a visual description of me. I am a Korean American woman with blue and black hair wearing a black blazer. And if this is your first time joining Kundiman for an event, welcome. We're so grateful to the 2024 AWP Conference for having us today for this very special reading and conversation, which we put together on the occasion of this year, 2024, being our 20th anniversary as an organization. Kundiman is a literary nonprofit dedicated to nurturing writers and readers of Asian American and Pacific Islander literature. We see the arts as a tool of empowerment, liberation, and solidarity. Through readings, our national network of regional groups, our annual retreat, and workshops and online classes, we seek to uplift writers of color and the storytellers of our communities. To learn more about our work and upcoming programs, you can visit kundiman.org. Later today, from 5 p.m. to 6:15 p.m., we will be co-hosting the Asian American Caucus in room 2215C, street level, right here in the conference center, in partnership with the Asian American Writers Workshop, Kaya Press, and Kearney Street Workshop. We hope to see you there. We have books for sale here today from our wonderful panelists, so please make sure to stick around and check them out and get them signed after this event. And before we begin, the event organizers would like to acknowledge that we are gathering during an active genocide taking place in Gaza and that the current violence in Palestine is the continuation of decades of colonial violence under Israeli apartheid. We stand in solidarity with victims of genocide in Sudan and Congo, and with the indigenous peoples on whose ancestral homelands this conference is being held, including the Osage, Kaw, Missouri, Shawnee, and Wyandot tribes. We stand firmly against anti-Blackness and recognize that police violence and all white supremacist violence must be named and opposed. These forms of violence, along with transphobic violence being legislated in Missouri and other states, endanger the lives of trans, queer, gender nonconforming, and non-binary people. Therefore, as we begin our event, we wish to underscore that none of us are free until all of us are free, and that all anti-racist, liberationist, and decolonial struggles are intertwined. And now, I'll introduce our wonderful readers and moderator for today. Marcy Calabretta Cancillo-Bayo is the author of Hour of the Ox, published by University of Pittsburgh Press in 2016, winner of the Donald Hall Prize for Poetry. She co-translated Yi Won's The World's Lightest Motorcycle, published by Zephyr Press in 2021, which won the 2022 Translation Grand Prize from the Literature Translation Institute of Korea. Cancillo-Bayo has received fellowships from the NEA, Kundiman, Knight Foundation, and American Literary Translators Association, and her work has appeared in Kenyon Review Online, The New York Times, and more. She is co-founder of the Adoptee Literary Festival and PEN America Miami/South Florida chapter, and a program manager for Miami Book Fair. Franny Choi is the author of 3 poetry collections: The World Keeps Ending and The World Goes On, published by Echo in 2022, Soft Science, published by Alice James Books in 2019, and Floating Brilliant Gone, published by Right Bloody Publishing in 2014. Their writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, the Paris Review, and elsewhere. A recipient of the Lily Rosenberg Fellowship, Holmes National Poetry Prize, and Elgin Award, Franny is the founder of Brew and Forge and the current Poet Laureate of Northampton, Massachusetts. Woo! She is faculty at Bennington College and is working on an essay collection about robots. Megha Majumdar is the author of the New York Times bestselling novel A Burning, which was nominated for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Prize, and the American Library Association's Andrew Carnegie Medal. It was named one of the best books of the year by media, including The Washington Post, The New York Times, NPR, The Atlantic, Vogue, and Time magazine. A 2022 Whiting Award winner, she currently teaches at Princeton University. Srikanth Reddy's latest book of poetry, Underworld Lit, was a finalist for the Griffin International Poetry Prize, the Poetry Society of America's 4 Quartets Prize, and a Times Literary Supplement Book of the Year for 2020. His writing has appeared in Harper's, The Guardian UK, The New York Times, and Poetry, and he is currently the poetry editor of the Paris Review. The recipient of fellowships from the Creative Capital Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Arts, Reddy is a professor of English and creative writing at the University of Chicago, where he edits the Phoenix Poets book series at the University of Chicago Press. We'll begin with readings from Franny, Megha, and Srikanth, and then go into a moderated conversation led by Marcy. Please join me in welcoming our wonderful panelists and moderator. Hello. Hello. Hi. Hi, big room. I'm Franny, and I'm going to be reading I think I'll read one poem and then a piece from the nonfiction that I've been working on. I'll give a quick visual description. I have black and blonde, sort of chin-length hair. I'm wearing a keffiyeh and a leather jacket and some artsy white glasses. I just want to, before I start, say an enormous thank you to Kundiman for so much beyond just putting this event together and allowing me to be part of it, which I hope I will get to kind of wax a little bit more later about all the things that I want to say thank you for. But also thank you to Gina Chung, thank you to Marcy for moderating today, and of course, thank you to my co-readers, Megha and Srikanth. It's such an honor to get to hang out with y'all and share this event with you. Okay, I'll read one poem from the new poetry book, as I said, and then if there's time, maybe I'll read one at the end. But this is from a series of poems that all have the same title, and that title is Upon Learning That Some Korean War Refugees Used Partially Detonated Napalm Canisters as Cooking Fuel. Upon learning that some Korean War refugees used partially detonated napalm canisters as cooking fuel. Somewhere in a prior world, a woman with my face is scraping the seeds from an unborn hell. All night, doom rang from the sky, and in the morning, there are mouths to feed. There are crocks in the cellar and the ruined crops, the early frost, the neighbor's red daughter strung up in the square. What else to do when the unspeakable comes? What to burn when it doesn't? Somewhere in a world that didn't quite end, a woman like me is foraging for that which failed to kill her. She is cranking open modernity's throat, wrenching her arc from its scat. She is a woman who can hack an impossible morning into water, bean paste, bitter leaves, another chance to fumble toward the next chance and the next. Every day of my life has been something other than my last. Every day an extinction misfires, and I put it to work. Thanks. That's a poem that wouldn't exist without Lucille Clifton, of course. Okay, I'm going to read, like I said, a bit from one of these essays that I've been working on from this book about robots. This is an essay about Terminator 2, which is my father's favorite movie. He claims to have seen it 10 times in the years that it came out. And if you don't know about the story of Terminator 2, I think that maybe what you need to know is there's a future robot apocalypse. Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator in the first movie gets sent back to kill the guy that's going to grow up to lead the human resistance against the robots. In the second Terminator, he also gets sent back, but this time he's the good guy protecting John Connor, the future leader of the human resistance. Just important general information to know. The essay is called Liquid Metal. I'm just going to read a bit of it. If I had to distill the spirit of Terminator 2 into a single scene, it's the one where John Connor is coaching Schwarzenegger's character to sound more human. You gotta listen to the way people talk, the kid complains, before teaching the cyborg useful everyday phrases like chill out, dickwad, and hasta la vista, baby. The Terminator is about as fluent as a textbook, about as fluent as my father. My father's English, too, was a scientific English, about which we children groaned, which we tried to bend to our snot-nosed sensibilities, though, of course, the reality was that we didn't know the first thing about how to sound cool. Somewhere in the transmission between our fantasies and his speech programs, things always got a little warped. Now, when my dad, like dads everywhere, delights in saying, hasta la vista, baby, it's a foreign imitation of a foreign imitation, so many steps removed from natural that it somehow all works again. I love my father for many reasons, not least of all his various uncanny recruitments of English. I love his accent in those early years and his accent now, the careful way he asks questions in public. I love how one year he started commanding "meet me" at dinner as a way of requesting extra portions of bulgogi. My love for my parents predisposes me to loving immigrant Englishes of all sorts, that love being a function of struggle, because to grow up with immigrant parents is to know the hours and shames behind every correct sentence, and to have delighted at the strange inventions that arise along the way to or beyond correctness. I can't help, therefore, but love the Terminator as another immigrant father, like and not like my own, a stolid and funny and formidable immigrant from the future.
Immigrants from the Future as It Happens is the title of this 2014 Economist article about robotics by the British science writer Oliver Morton. Discussing the sci-fi roots of new developments in robotics, Morton turns to the writing of Isaac Asimov, whose novels and short stories laid the blueprint for how we, both scientists and the general public, think about robots. In his article, Morton points out that Asimov's work was the product of a particular sensibility, background, and set of concerns, those of a child of hard-working and hard-pressed Russian parents in 1930s Brooklyn. Asimov's robot stories, Morton argues, were immigrant stories, except that the robots are immigrants not from abroad, but from the future. Margaret Ree, the poet and scholar, writes that Asimov's robots were largely featured as second-class laborers bearing an uncanny resemblance to the characterization of Asian Americans, at once consigned to do the dull, dirty work and maligned for their suspiciously advanced technical skills. But before Asimov, there was Miller, California Senator John Miller, who, in an 1881 speech to Congress, described the Chinese as machine-like, of obtuse nerve, but little affected by heat or cold, wiry, sinewy, with muscles of iron. They are automatic engines of flesh and blood. They are patient, stolid, unemotional. The following year, the first major Chinese Exclusion Act was passed. Today, Asian workers labor across borders without ever having to migrate, coding, answering customer service calls, training bots, driving clicks, and writing spam. For this work, they're called robotic until the day they're replaced by AI. Is it possible to be xenophobic against the future? When our people arrive through the portal, how loud do we have to cry out to be heard as human? It happens in parallel slow-mo. Turning a corner, John sees a man. Is he a man? He's almost too large to be real, towering in leather jacket and sunglasses, all armor and threat. Panicked, the boy skids and runs in the opposite direction when, around the corner, another man, smaller, sharper, murder in his eyes, blue and blue. This one's a cop. There's trouble. For a moment, John's caught between, shotgun or pistol, huge or lithe. The moment stretches, deadly long. Then the huge man says it, "Get down." And the spell is broken. Good robot, bad robot. Everything falls into place as Arnold shields the child with his body, bullets raining into his enormous, benevolent back. We choose him with bullets. We choose him. As a child in the 90s, I got asked it all the time, Chinese or Japanese. Then, when I was a third thing, another step in the flow chart, North Korean or South Korean. I answered, by simple algorithm, I became a good Asian, if not exactly a familiar one. But I fell on the right side of that line. Not commie, not Axis, not gulag, not brainwash. Yes, army base. Yes, Purple Heart. Yes, Samsung. Yes, sweet. I grew up on one side of the 38th parallel, though I grew up here in a series of American college towns. The border followed me everywhere, north or south, north or south. And I answered as a child, with that oldest, desperate child's need. I'm good, I'm good. We were chosen with bullets. The 38th parallel inside me divided monster from acceptable monster. First in our living room in Madison, later in my bedroom in the suburbs of Atlanta, I rooted for the cyborg that had been reprogrammed to fight for us. Maybe this is what the Terminator promised, a way to be alien and loved, suspected and loved, to be unyieldingly other, unfeeling, unfriendly, indistinguishable from the enemy down to the M79 grenade launcher strapped to his back, and still to have a place in that motley little family of heroes. But I think love maybe flattens what I mean here. Yes, John, the child, clings to him as a long-missing father figure. Sarah, his mother, goes from sledgehammer-wielding suspicion to a single, solemn handshake just before Schwarzenegger lowers himself into a vat of molten metal at the end. But the Terminator doesn't love either of them, and he doesn't need to. Like everything else about him, his allegiance is artificial, programmed by one side or another depending on the film. And yet, there he is, in the middle of the frame, good and unassimilable and held by the camera with something almost like reverence. There, finally, is his loyalty, melting away with everything else at the end, filling the screen with its borderless red glow. Thanks. I think I'll stop there. Thank you all so much.
Hi, everyone. Hi. That was beautiful. I loved what you said about immigrant Englishes. Thank you so much, Kundiman. Thank you so much, Gina, for doing such thoughtful work to get us all here. And I just want to shout out for anyone in the room who's not familiar. Gina is a writer, and she has her second book, a story collection, coming out next month. I'm going to read a little bit from my novel, which is called A Burning. And if it is not too confusing, I might try adding a couple craft notes, since we're all writers in the room. "You smell like smoke," my mother said to me. So I rubbed an oval of soap in my hair and poured a whole bucket of water on myself before a neighbor complained that I was wasting the morning supply. One thing I'll say about beginning a novel, which I'm sure the novelists in the room are familiar with, is the question of not only where do you begin, but what is the beginning supposed to do for your book? And part of what I thought about a lot is the beginning is the place where the novel makes promises, right? It makes promises about what its concerns are, what its obsessions are. And so this little section about wasting a supply of water, I wanted the novel to promise right away that it will be interested in a perceived scarcity of resources and how that makes people behave. There was a curfew that day. On the main street, a police jeep would creep by every half hour. Daily wage laborers, compelled to work, would come home with arms raised to show they had no weapons. In bed, my wet hair spread on the pillow, I picked up my new phone, purchased with my own salary, screen guard still attached. On Facebook, there was only one conversation. The night before, I had been at the railway station, no more than a 15-minute walk from my house. I ought to have seen the men who stole up to the open windows and threw flaming torches into the halted train. But all I saw were carriages burning, their doors locked from the outside and dangerously hot. One of the beginnings of this novel actually was with the burning of the train, and I worked so hard on pages which began with the burning of the train, told us a little about the passengers, and ultimately I kind of removed all of that, and it became completely consumed by the rest of the beginning. But I still really love that I had that very intricate picture of the carriage in my mind, even though the page doesn't hold it on the surface anymore. The fire spread to huts bordering the station, smoke filling the chests of those who lived there. More than 100 people died. The government promised compensation to the families of the dead. 80,000 rupees, which, well, the government promises many things. In a video, to the dozen microphones thrust at his chin, the chief minister was saying, "Let the authorities investigate." Somebody had spliced this comment with a video of policemen scratching their heads. It made me laugh. I admired these strangers on Facebook who said anything they wanted to. They were not afraid of making jokes. Whether it was about the police or the ministers, they had their fun, and wasn't that freedom? I'll stop there, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's very bright up here. I'm wishing I had my Arnold Schwarzenegger sunglasses. And thank you to everyone at Kundiman for organizing this event and for all the incredible work that you do as a community. I'll read a few sections from this last book, a little bit out of order. Maybe I'll even read the section numbers so you'll know when one ends and one begins. 16. A student visited my office the day before yesterday with some questions concerning her midterm exam. Apparently, I'd been a little dismissive of her worldview in my comments. As the conversation wore on, I found myself explaining that it would have been physically impossible for Dante to crawl through the center of Earth, because, as everybody knows, the planet's core is very hot. But he went all the way through and saw the stars again, the girl insisted. Are you calling him a liar? She'd been homeschooled in a rural area downstate and occasionally required some additional learning support on my part. Once more, I tried to explain that nobody could pass through the world and come out the other side. It would be metaphysically implausible. Studying a loose tile on the ceiling, my visitor, whose name regrettably escapes me, seemed unconvinced. When I get to heaven, she rose suddenly to go, her face flushed, I will ask Dante. Classes were letting out for the day. The antiquated street lamps had begun to flicker on, one by one, across the main quad. Consulting my watch, I worried that I might be late for my appointment. And what if he ended up in the other place? I inquired, showing the girl out the door. Then you ask him. 3. For the past several years, I've taught an introductory course on world literature at the university where I'm presently employed. The offering has frequently proven to be a disappointment, both to myself and to the students, some in headscarves, some occasionally dressed in fatigues, who register for this seminar in order to satisfy their humanities requirement. As far as classes go, it was an almost painless experience. The instructor is fairly intelligent and enthusiastic about the material, but is unreceptive, even intolerant, of anything that is not a poem, or a poem in prose form. That's an actual student evaluation that I got for this class. Made me question things, including the value of higher learning. Looking over the feedback last summer, I began to consider a different approach. There would be new assignments, self-assessments, and regularly scheduled office hours this time around, followed by a transitional withdrawal of black gowns through the spring morning mist. And because I know comparatively little of this world, I've decided to work my way up from below. 4. Hume 101, Introduction to the Underworld, cross-listed with Divinity and Composite. In this course, students will be ferried across the river of sorrow, subsist on a diet of clay, weigh their hearts against a feather on the infernal balance, and ascend a viewing pagoda in order to gaze upon their homelands until emptied of all emotion. Texts will include the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Mayan Book of the Dead, the Ethiopian Book of the Dead, and Muriel Rukeyser's Book of the Dead. The goals of the seminar are to introduce students to the posthumous disciplinary regimes of various cultures and to help them develop the communication skills that are crucial for success in today's global marketplace. All readings in English. Requirements include the death of the student, an oral report, and a final paper. Five. I promised my wife that I would call Dr. Song today. After putting Mira down for her nap and slipping outside for a smoke, I lifted the receiver. The sound it emitted, which I've heard without pause countless times before, seemed to me otherworldly now, like somebody's finger playing on the wet rim of a crystal bowl in a derelict theater before the wars. It's hard to say how long I stood there listening. It may have been seconds or seasons. The rings of Saturn kept turning in their groove. For reasons beyond me, our seminar had already moved on from late medieval Europe to developing world underworlds. I dialed 1-800-INFERNO, and before the first ring, a woman's voice answered in heavily accented English. "Is it you?" "I think so," I replied. Outside, the honey locusts sprinkled their pale spinning leaves in real time. Focusing on one as it fell seemed to slow the general descent. "O creature, gracious and good," the faraway lady recited as if reading against her will from a prepared text. Traversing the dusky element to visit us who stained the world with blood. I could hear rain trickling in a gutter spout on the other end of the line. "Please," I said into the receiver, "remove my name from your list." I'll read two more sections. 6. While outlining the requirements for our first critical essay of the term, I notice a hand rising in world historical time at the back of the classroom. "What if I'm ideologically opposed to revision?" asks the red-headed boy in a New Slaves t-shirt. That, again, actually did happen to me. A city bus unloads its pageantry outside the window. A handful of sparrows erupts from the equestrian statue on the quad. I remember Sun Tzu's advice to humanities instructors, which I review on index cards at the outset of each academic quarter. Hold out baits to entice the enemy, feign disorder, and crush him. "What exactly is your ideology?" I ask, stroking my beard. "I'm a Zen Naxalite crypto-objectivist," replies my interlocutor. "How about you?" I have no choice but to improvise. Pro-recycling? Anti-genocide? A voice from beyond my peripheral vision says, "You're nothing but a pseudo-Kantian neoliberal mirage with meta-narcissistic tendencies." "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." "14. Please print clearly and remember your name. 1. The river of fire, in ancient Greek thanatopography, feeds into the river of blank. 2. From the river of pain spring 2 rivers, the river of blank and the river of blank. 3. The river of blank runs a separate course entirely, concealed inside the Greek word for truth. 4. At the sight of sinners approaching, the blank seethes like butter in a frying pan. 5. Blank is the Sanskrit river of ash. 6. As the sun god Ra floats down the river of the hidden chamber, his head is exchanged for that of a blank. 7. Those for whom much lamentation is made find the blank swollen with tears and difficult to cross. 8. To our knowledge, the river of blank has no name. Thank you.
Such stunning readings. Oh my goodness. Please give another round of applause for that. That was for all 3 of them. It's so wonderful to hear you read your work out loud after sitting with it on the page for a while, and to be sitting in the room with all of you on this stage to celebrate Kundiman's 20th anniversary. What an auspicious year. A quick shout out to our ASL interpreters and our techs, visual representation, audio representation. And just a quick note, I am an Asian American woman with long black hair and red lipstick and a green blazer and jeans. We are all here, you all are here, we all are here to celebrate Kundiman's 20th year and all of your work. This sort of feels like a brief snapshot that is by no means comprehensive, but just a snippet of a possibility of what Asian American can and has come to mean in literature and America today. And so shout out also to our beloved co-founders, Sarah Gambito and Joseph Legaspi, who started the festival at University of Virginia, or retreat, as a retreat just for poets. And as Dina mentioned in her introduction, that over the years it's grown in just 2 short decades to encompass so much, events like this and workshops and so many things that bring community together. I would love to kick off our conversation by asking each of you to talk a little bit about your first impact and experience with Kundiman as a retreat. I myself am a transracial adoptee, but my first experience was a retreat in 2014 and then again in 2017 and 18. And so I know that you've been faculty and fellows, and so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. And Franny, if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. Yeah, I was a retreat fellow in, I think it was 2016 and 17, maybe. I think I went back to back because I was like, I'm going to try to spread it out, and then it turned out I needed to go back immediately because I was in graduate school. And I was thinking about this question. What was my first kind of in like an early memory of interacting with Kundiman? And it was actually before I attended the retreat as a fellow, and it was just. I think that my first memory is just kind of like sort of yearning to be part of the space. Actually, I applied to attend the retreat I think 4 times before I got in, and I knew people who had applied like 6 or 7 times, and I was feeling sort of like I felt so much yearning to be part of that space, and I'd like gotten to do some like events and stuff that were with Kundiman, so I was sort of like peripheral, but I remember that. My dear friend Fatima Asker, who I think attended the retreat maybe like a year before I did, they said something like, it's not going to make sense what I say right now to you, but just know that when you arrive there, they will have been waiting for you, like the space will have been waiting for you. And I was like, well, then just let me in, but I was like, yeah, you're right, that does not make sense to me. But when I got there, I was like, there's something about like the
this like slightly off-world like place that had anticipated and like yearned for my arrival as much as I had been yearning to be kind of like ready for it. That was like deeply reparative for me, and I think it's kind of like has shaped that sense of this world, this seat in the world has been waiting for you, has been waiting for you to be ready for it. It has, I think, like sort of shaped the way that I think about literary community, but also kind of you know, the sort of things that might turn into gatekeeping, the like deep anxieties of things like the application process. That there's like something more like a soul match or something, for lack of a better metaphorical framework. But yeah, so that's, yeah, my earliest memory is wanting to go so bad and then arriving there. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Megha?
Yeah, very similar to you, Franny. I taught there last summer, and I was just struck by slightly off-world is a perfect way to put it. It was a literary space really unlike anywhere else that I had been, because it seemed to exist beyond considerations of, you know, publication anxieties or career success, and it was so profoundly honest. Everybody there was so profoundly honest about why we write, what we are struggling with in our writing, and it felt like a very genuine kind of love and solidarity developed over a very short period of time because everybody was willing to be so honest. It's remarkable.
Yeah, that's, I'm also realizing that I may have forgotten to give a visual description of myself. So I'm a South Asian man wearing blue jeans and sweater. It's hard for me to tell what color my sweater is, so it's bluish. My experience with Kundiman was several years ago. I taught at the retreat, and I think one thing I could say is I think I'm of like a slightly later generation, or just like half generation, older than probably you both, and the students at the retreat as well. And what I found very quickly was that my own understanding of my own identity and literary art was completely opened up in ways that really quite surprised me and that have been extremely meaningful. And I think probably because I maybe identify more with your father's generation. Terminator 2 I remember very well when it came out in the theater, and I think that I kind of belong to a period of Asian American experience in this country when assimilation was the absolute imperative for survival. And so thinking about oneself as Asian was very fraught in a different way. Not that it's not fraught now, but it carried a lot of burdens with it that I think at that retreat, hearing young writers speak openly about their fears, their exaltation, and their love for each other. I just, generally have a heart of stone, but I did find that, there was a young poet who talked about their identity and struggles, and by the end of Ocean Vuong, telling his story, to us as a group, introducing himself as a student, I was so moved. And then it's been so moving to see so many of those writers. I think Asagara was also in that year, and just seeing all of these writers just, transform the world has been really a privilege.
Yeah, I think that resonates quite a bit in terms of the kind of community that it's become. It's more than just a retreat. It really is a deep dive across multiple layers of selfhood and art and community at the intersection. And I did want to ask, because so I'm an event organizer, arts administrator, and writer across multiple genres, but you all are not only writers and sometimes in multiple genres, but also you're teaching, you're editing, you're creating your own retreat spaces and things. So Franny is as poet laureate, congratulations by the way, of Northampton, Massachusetts, and also the founder of Brew and Forge, which I love as an organization, and also the retreat that you do, and Megha as both an editor, as a teacher, and also as you are all humans with very complex lives, and Srikanth with the Phoenix Poets series as an editor as well, and you've done editing as the poetry editor for Paris Review, all of that. Balancing all of that as you are thinking about all of those are building communities and contributing back into the literary community as a whole. How do you balance that and build life and art around that without? I mean, it's hard to separate, right? So how do you do that? And it's Franny, you look like you want to start.
Yeah, I mean, I'm. Thank you for bringing up Brew and Forge. I mean, that is also a project that this retreat, that this organization that I started as a small project, basically an email list years ago, which is now we're planning for our second retreat for poets and organizers of color to hang out together and write and learn and think about cultural organizing together. I mean, Kundiman is. I will first say that it would not exist without Kundiman. Tomiko Bayer, who's the other person that I work with, like we met at Kundiman, and the retreat has been kind of central in our vision, and like a really kind of like grounding. Just grounding for our vision of what we want to accomplish with this retreat. We want to create a space that it holds people as much as we felt held at Kundiman. And so I think that maybe like the first thing that I'll say is like, because I know just how much of my life was made possible by community spaces, and just like made possible by the people that I met at them, but also just the feeling that I belonged somewhere in the literary world. That is, I think, the thing that kind of like continues to push me into, it's like as necessary a part of my creative process as anything else, right? And I think also, without doing that work, it starts to become easy to feel like disconnected and alone, and like it's just me and a few of my friends, or me and my brilliant husband, poet Cameron Awkward Rich. It's just like us being poets in the world, and it's obviously like it helps me like remember how deeply interconnected my artistry is with other people's, but. Yes, it is also, there are limited hours in the day and limited hours in the week, which is a fucking tragedy. And I think that it has, I've had to really, I think every year has been an exercise in recommitting to and honing down my priorities, to say that at the top of my list of where I'm going to put my hours and my heart are my work, Brew and Forge, like my work, like my writing, Brew and Forge, and then like the people in my life, and then you know, my job, the thing that I get paid to do, teach the students, like I will do the best I can with what I have after my these things, which are the great priorities, and like continuing to recommit myself to those. Like I do a lot of journaling and stuff, and whiteboarding helps me when like the endless stream of people saying, "Will you write a thing for us? Will you write a review? Will you do an interview? Will you come read for," you know, those things which do, I know, I love that work, and it's so hard to say no to like going to read for a group of people, but it helps me to like be brave and like you know, ground myself in the joy of missing out on some of that wonderful stuff, to say like it is an infinite. There will the literary world, the university, capitalism will infinitely ask me to do things. Will infinitely ask us all to do things, and to just like ground myself and saying like, it's these three. These are my three. Yeah.
So I used to work in publishing at a small press called Catapult, and now I teach. I think some of my former students who are brilliant writers at the Michener Center are here. When I was looking for work in publishing, several people said, if you want to write, don't work in publishing. But, you know, I found that really supposes that working with other writers becomes a place of bitterness or resentment for you, which it never became for me, you know? And I was very conscious about, am I finding joy and meaning in this work? And the answer was always yes, and it's true today. I love being close to other writers, and I think, you know, discussing stuff like craft and structure with other writers is my favorite thing to do. I think being in that space with other writers brings me a lot of joy. So to be alert to how it's all part of the same project, you know? I think about craft for my own writing. I think about craft in other people's writing. All of it feels like one cohesive and beautiful project.
That's so much of what you're both saying totally resonates with me, for me. And, you know, I think what I would just say maybe kind of briefly is just to quote a friend of mine, the novelist and a fiction writer Deb Olin Unferth once said, what you gotta remember is nobody wants you to write. You know, your kid doesn't want you to write. Your kid wants you to play with them. Your students don't want you to write. They want you to teach them and help them write. Your boss doesn't want you to write. You know, nobody wants you to write. So you have to be that person. And I think that's kind of true, but the one place that I've found that actually, oh, someone does want me to write, was at a place like Kundiman, and also the like group of people who you come into contact with through like editorial work. You know, they want you to publish them, but also they want to see what you're doing also. So I think that there, you know, find the exceptions that, you know, to Deb Unferth's rule, and Kundiman, I think, is really a really meaningful one.
That one hit very close. And I'm curious in thinking about those small moments and people and communities that help you to keep writing, and also, as you were saying, the joy of missing out, very underrated for writers to say no.
This has been the thing I've been repeating to myself. You're like, okay, there's also the joy of missing out. We're just missing it over and over. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot about time and pacing. I mean, you've now been writing for quite a while, and you have a body of work, right? And the number of hours in a day, just the limited amount of time, but also time that you have spent building your careers and writing and building relationships. I also think about how pacing of a writer's career is built, and it's different for every person. Like three very different careers across multiple genres and space and time. I'm curious. We are all people who are living in this world, in this particular time in history, and sometimes the pace of our own writing and craft and development as writers and careers doesn't feel quite in alignment with the pace of how the world is moving and changing, and even how students might focus on one thing or another over time in one semester to another, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you navigate your writing process in terms of craft or content, alongside feeling in or out of alignment across time? And feel free to use examples from work or projects.
Maybe I'll let somebody else go first. Maybe I'll let somebody else go first on this one. Yeah.
Srikanth, did you like
Sure,
to start?
sure. I think like stillness is something that's very hard to find, just as a person in the world now, and I think it gets harder and harder to find. I mean, maybe when you retire, you have an abundance of that, but I think time starts to feel like it's accelerating every year, and so I think, and everyone has different challenges that make it difficult for them, in particular, to produce that stillness for writing, all of the failure that writing requires. And so I don't know how other people do it. Some go to writing retreats. Kundiman would be an example of a place that produces that. It's a very active, dynamic space, and it's a community, but it also allows you to step out of your ordinary, the things that are preventing you, that might be preventing you from making art. And for me, I think it's really saying that writing is the one non-negotiable. I think, like what you were saying, like and then if students who one loves and cares about have a little bit less of a piece of you, that's okay. But you make sure that that piece is, really there. But I think that no matter what your life configuration is, if just the writing is the one non-negotiable, then.
Megha.
I think sometimes there can be so much pressure, a kind of self-imposed pressure to publish quickly, publish frequently, and I have never subscribed to that. I'm very aware of it, but I never let myself believe it. And I think that has been very useful, I think we all want to write things which will mean something to us when we are, decades farther on in our lives. And I think it's a useful perspective to have, is what work will seem meaningful to me, 30 years later, 40 years later. What is the work that I want to have done? And that's a very helpful perspective. It helps me not be anxious about things like for instance, I have never published a short story. I just worked on a novel. And so for the 4 years that I was working on a novel, my output in terms of anything visible and published was zero, But I tried not to be anxious about that, because I knew that the work that would matter to me decades later was the novel.
I love that, Megha. And I admire that so much, the refusal to believe it. And I just want to absorb some of that, because I find it very hard. I find it very hard to fight against. But I also know, you know, and I really resonate with everything that you said also about stillness, Srikanth, but, you know, and I remember I try to like recommit myself to the knowledge that for me as a reader of poetry specifically, but also just literature, it is the opportunity to slow down and leave the pace of daily life, and kind of do a little bit of very still time traveling across out of this particular moment and the constant worrying about the future. And yet, I also know that I'm a person who is very motivated by external deadlines and external pressures, and I'm also somebody whose interest moves sort of quickly, and so I also think that for me, allowing it just some of that pressure to structure my writing, to say like I have to turn in this book by September, therefore I can't teach at this thing, right. Or like therefore I cannot. I'm so sorry, but I cannot write you a blurb. I think that it gives me a little bit of like the plausible deniability or something, like an excuse to say like no, I really need to do this. And then I think also some of like that pressure helps me to be fully immersed for a shorter period of time of like maybe 2 years or something, 2 or 3 years in that project. So yeah, so I think that it's kind of like a balance.
I'm thinking a lot about that personality, how personality can also, you're all tapping into the strength in your personality to really bend it to writing and producing as you need and living, and not forgetting the living part. I'm thinking about what you just said about writing for something that that would really resonate with you in 30 to 40 years, which can feel impossible for sometimes when I'm working on something, or when you're a new writer, and so I'm thinking also about how this is a stage that's full of such cumulative wisdom and experience, and people have been reading your work and following you for so long, and this is after all a writing conference, and Kundiman feels often like a collective of wisdom, like much like Borg, to be a little bit,
I see you, Star Trek.
As a collective of wisdom and support. And so I'm curious if there is anything that you would say to your younger self, like maybe pre-book, pre-first book, or pre-finishing, or anything that might serve as an encouragement, and for the writers in the room as they're thinking about their own journeys and building their own careers as writers and sustaining that life. And Megha, we'll start with you, if that's all right.
I think the most beautiful thing is to make something that only you can make, and to try and make it in its full complexity, and to never try to shave away any of the intricacy of what you're interested in, even if it has, unexpected, surprising, difficult aspects. And to work on that complexity and fully see it can take a long time. And I think the discipline to keep going, and the discipline to say that if I don't make this thing that I know I'm capable of making, I will regret it. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really powerful internal motivator. It's something that I think about sometimes. So I would say that, especially for my first book, nobody, like you were just saying, Srikanth, there's really nobody waiting for us to write, if we're not fully believing in it ourselves, nobody else cares, but that you can make that beautiful and complex thing, and you have to make it. What a loss if you don't make it.
Yeah, I guess I would, I think one thing I would say is And I'm thinking back to the retreat where I was kind of asked a similar question, like, what's your advice, you know, or what wisdom? No one was asking me about my wisdom, because Young Lee was there, and they were asking him about what wisdom he had for them, because there were smart young people there. But I think that it's hard for me to say, because I don't really, I feel very unsure of myself, you know, as a writer, and I feel that there are many better ways to be a writer than the ones that I've stumbled into. But I think that what I would say is that I learned so much from the people who were called students at that retreat, and so I think that maybe the wisdom may come up from younger people as much as, you know, the other way around. I don't know anything about social media, right? Like I can't, like it's a whole new environment, and so I'm learning from people about what I could do better.
I love both of your responses so much. I think that the thing that I would tell my younger self, the piece of advice I would give, is to believe in your capacity for change and your capacity for growth. And I think that I remember there was a time when I had, it was like the poem that I thought was like the best poem I'd ever written, and it was published in a small journal that then went out of print, and I was like, oh no, like my best poem is never going to be read, and like I've wasted it or something, which is a very ungenerous thing to think, but I think it was mostly ungenerous, or it was also very ungenerous, I think, to myself, to think that I would never write, I would never grow as an artist, I would never change. And then I think also when things like threatened that my sense of who I was as a poet, then I became very rattled and really clung to things that I believed were what made me Franny Choi or whatever. And so I would just like try to, yeah, I wish for my younger self a lot more compassion for themselves, but also to really believe that they will keep growing and that they will keep writing the next best poem they've ever written, and will grow and like to love and look forward to that growth. Yeah.
Wow, that's really powerful. Wow, yeah, I am really grateful, and I know that so many in the room and in the live stream and people who are not even here are so grateful to you all for adding your wisdom and writing to the collective that is Kundiman's community, and just thank you for being here and for helping us carry the community into the next 20, 30, 40 years, hopefully. 20 more years. As we welcome Gina back to the stage, please give a round of applause to our folks. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to Kundiman for bringing everyone together to celebrate 20 years.
Oh my gosh, thank you all so much for these incredible readings, this amazing conversation. Please join me in another round of applause for our amazing speakers. Thank you all so much for being part of today and for being part of Kundiman. Thank you all. We are going to close out our conversation now. Please meet us out in the lobby just outside the ballroom where we'll have books for sale and where our speakers will be signing books. Thank you again for being here. We're so grateful to AWP for having us and to our wonderful speakers, so thank you.